What are you even doing with your life, Jennifer? My mother's voice cut through the family reunion chatter as she raised her wine glass, drawing everyone's attention. While your cousins are becoming doctors and executives, you're still floating, around with no real direction. I felt 20 pairs of eyes on me as she continued. I suppose every family needs their disappointment. The room fell silent until my uncle awkwardly changed the subject. 6 months later, when the real estate agent called my parents to schedule a viewing of the lakeside property they'd dreamed of owning for 30 years, they had no idea I was the anonymous buyer who had purchased it 2 weeks earlier. The look on my mother's face when I handed her the keys at what they thought was just a property tour is something I'll never forget. Shock, confusion, and the slow realization that the daughter she had dismissed had been building an empire right under her nose. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon my mother officially labeled me the family disappointment happened during our annual Williams family reunion at my Aunt Patricia's sprawling home in Vermont. The early October weather had painted the surrounding maple trees in brilliant oranges and reds, a stark contrast to the cool reception I received inside. The house buzzed with the achievements of my extended family, cousins with medical fellowships, corporate promotions, and growing investment portfolios. I had arrived slightly late, having driven 6 hours from my small apartment in Brooklyn. My cousin Emma had just finished announcing her recent partnership at a prestigious law firm when my mother, Catherine Williams, spotted me trying to slip in unnoticed. "Jennifer finally decided to join us," she called out, drawing unwanted attention my way. "Emma was just telling us about her partnership. Isn't that wonderful?" I nodded and offered Emma a genuine smile. "That's amazing, Em. Congratulations." My mother wasn't finished. "Maybe she can give you some career advice, Jennifer. Heaven knows you could use some direction." The living room, with its vaulted ceilings and panoramic views of Lake Champlain, suddenly felt suffocating. My father, Robert, a retired investment banker, glanced up from his conversation with my uncle, his expression a mixture of resignation and mild embarrassment at my mother's comment. I was 32 years old, but in that moment, I felt 16. Again, the perpetual disappointment who had rejected the family's prescribed path of prestigious universities, corporate careers, and strategic marriages. Instead, I'd attended a state college, studying digital marketing and computer science, choices my mother had deemed settling for mediocrity. "Jennifer's doing just fine," my cousin Daniel interjected, passing me a much-needed glass of wine. Daniel, 2 years my senior, had always been my defender in family gatherings, perhaps because he understood what it meant to deviate from the Williams family blueprint. He'd chosen teaching over the family's beloved finance industry. "Fine isn't exactly thriving," my mother replied with a dismissive wave. "At her age, I was already managing accounts for major clients, and your father was being groomed for partnership." I took a slow sip of wine, letting the familiar criticism wash over me. "I'm working on some projects that interest me," I offered, knowing the vague response would only frustrate her further. "Projects," she repeated with a sigh. "Darling, hobbies don't build retirement accounts or secure your future." What my mother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my projects had evolved into something far beyond their limited understanding of success. While they measured achievement in corner offices and country club memberships, I had been quietly building something that would have rendered their traditional metrics obsolete. "Catherine, let the girl be," my Uncle James said, attempting to diffuse the tension. "Not everyone needs to follow the same path." My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. She had never appreciated being contradicted, especially regarding her children's lives. "I'm simply concerned about Jennifer's future. Is that so wrong? Look around this room. Everyone here has established themselves in respectable careers. Even your youngest, James, has just secured that position at Goldman. The conversation shifted to my cousin's new banking role, but my mother wasn't finished with me. As family members dispersed toward the dining room for dinner, she cornered me by the antique grandfather clock that had witnessed generations of Williams family dynamics. "Jennifer, Thomas Berkeley is here," she said, lowering her voice. "His divorce was finalized last month, and he's recently been made CFO at Meridian Financial. I've seated you beside him at dinner." Thomas Berkeley, the son of my father's former colleague, a man 15 years my senior whose main personality trait seemed to be his stock portfolio. The strategic matchmaking was so transparent it would have been funny if it weren't so frustrating. "Mom, I'm not interested in Thomas Berkeley," I said firmly. "Interested?" She adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous habit she'd developed over decades of maintaining the perfect appearance. "Jennifer, at this point, you should be practical. Your father and I won't be around forever, and your situation remains unstable at best." My situation, her preferred euphemism for my career choices and independent lifestyle. For years, this subtle undermining had stung, had made me question my own path and worth. But standing there, watching her calculated planning, I felt something different. Pity. She couldn't see beyond the narrow definition of success she'd inherited and subsequently imposed on her children. "I need to make a few work calls before dinner," I said, extracting myself from the conversation. "I'll be in shortly." I stepped onto the wraparound porch, the cool autumn air a welcome relief from the stifling expectations inside. The sun was beginning to set over Lake Champlain, casting golden light across the water. In the distance stood a magnificent property, a modern yet timeless structure of glass and stone that seemed to emerge organically from the surrounding landscape. "Beautiful, isn't it?" My father's voice startled me as he joined me on the porch. "The Lakestone estate? Been on the market for years, too expensive for even the most successful in these parts." I nodded, studying the property that I knew meant more to my parents than they would ever admit. For 30 years, that house had represented everything they worked toward, the ultimate symbol of success in their world. "Your mother means well," he said after a moment of silence. "She just wants security for you." "I know, Dad." I did know. Catherine Williams had grown up with financial instability, the daughter of a factory worker who lost his job during economic downturns. Her relentless pursuit of security wasn't just ambition, it was armor. "She doesn't understand what I'm building," I added quietly. My father glanced at me with genuine curiosity. For all his adherence to traditional paths, he had always possessed something my mother lacked: the capacity to recognize that innovation often required deviation. "What exactly are you building, Jen?" he asked, and for a moment I considered. Telling him everything, about Nexus, about the patents, about the upcoming merger that would change everything. But years of dismissal had taught me the value of revealing success only when it was undeniable. "Something that matters, Dad," I said instead. "Something that's mine." He seemed to consider this, nodding slowly. "Well, I hope it brings you what you're looking for." He gestured toward the dining room. "We should head in before your mother sends a search party." Dinner proceeded exactly as choreographed by my mother. I was seated beside Thomas Berkeley, who spent the first course detailing his recent acquisition of a summer home in the Hamptons, and the second course explaining his investment strategy with the enthusiasm of someone describing paint drying. "Jennifer works in some sort of online marketing," my mother interjected when Thomas paused for breath. "But she's considering more stable opportunities, aren't you, dear?" The assumption was so far from reality that I almost laughed. 4 years ago, I had indeed started in digital marketing, leveraging my technical background to help companies optimize their online presence. But that role had simply been the foundation, providing me insights into consumer behavior and digital inefficiencies that led to the creation of Nexus, my company that had developed a revolutionary AI-driven platform for personalized digital experiences. Actually, I'm quite satisfied with my current direction, I replied evenly. Jennifer has always been independent, my mother told Thomas with a meaningful look that translated clearly. She's difficult, but worth the trouble. For the right man. From across the table, Daniel caught my eye and gave an imperceptible eye roll of solidarity. Beside him, his wife Lauren, a sculptor whose career choice had initially scandalized my mother, offered me a sympathetic smile. After dinner, as guests moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, my mother called for everyone's attention with the distinctive ping of silver against crystal that had signaled countless Williams family announcements over the years. "I'd like to propose a toast," she began, glass raised, "to family achievements, to Emma's partnership, to young James's new position at Goldman, to Michael and Sarah's 20th anniversary, and to Thomas," she nodded toward my dinner companion, "on his recent promotion to CFO. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Glasses raised around the room, the successful acknowledging the successful in a choreographed display of collective validation. "And of course," my mother continued, her gaze falling on me with what she likely thought was supportive encouragement, but landed as thinly veiled disappointment, "to Jennifer, who is still finding her way. May this be the year she finally discovers her proper place." The room fell uncomfortably silent. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from a slow-burning anger I rarely allowed myself to feel, toward my mother. "Thank you for that." "Encouragement, Mom," I said, raising my own glass. "And thank you, everyone, for the reminder of what the Williams family values most." My Uncle James cleared his throat awkwardly before launching into a story about his recent fishing trip, desperate to dispel the tension that hung in the air. As conversations resumed, I slipped away to the same porch where I'd spoken with my father earlier. The Lakestone estate was now illuminated by strategically placed lighting that highlighted its architectural features, making it appear even more impressive against the night sky. "That was rough," Daniel said, joining me outside. "Aunt Catherine outdid herself tonight." I shrugged, finding I wasn't as bothered as I should have been. "It's nothing new. Still." He leaned against the railing beside me. The proper place comment was particularly inspired. "The irony is, I've found my place," I said quietly. "It's just not one they can recognize or understand." Daniel studied me with newfound curiosity. "You know, you've been particularly zen about all this criticism lately. Usually you're at least a little rattled by the Williams family judgment committee." I smiled slightly. "Let's just say I've gained some perspective. This mysterious work of yours must be going well." Then, I considered how to respond. Daniel had always been supportive, but the habit of protection ran deep. "It is. Better than anyone here could imagine." "Care to share with your favorite cousin?" "I promise not to report back to Aunt Catherine." I laughed. "Soon everyone will—" "No. But for now." I gestured toward the lakeside estate. "I'd rather enjoy the view and the knowledge that success doesn't always look the way the Williams family thinks it should." Later that night, as I prepared to leave for my hotel in town, having politely declined my mother's offer to stay in my childhood bedroom, she cornered me once more in the entrance hall. "Jennifer, I wish you had made more of an effort with Thomas. These opportunities don't present themselves indefinitely, you know." I zipped up my jacket, suddenly tired of the pretense. "Mom, I don't need Thomas Berkeley or anyone else to secure my future." "That's a lovely sentiment, but sentiment doesn't fund retirement accounts," she replied. "Your father and I worry about you. Everyone else has established themselves so securely, and you're still experimenting. Has it occurred to you that what looks like experimenting to you might actually be building something worthwhile?" I asked. She sighed that familiar sigh, the one that communicated both concern and disappointment. "Darling, I've been in business for 40 years. I know the difference between building something substantial and whatever it is you're doing with these internet projects." The dismissal was so complete, so confident in its wrongness, that it no longer hurt. Instead, it reinforced my decision to let my success speak for itself when the time came. "I should go. Early start tomorrow," I said, kissing her cheek perfunctorily. "Think about what I said about Thomas," she called after me as I walked to my car. "He mentioned he might be in New York next month. You could show him some of the better restaurants." I drove away from my aunt's house, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror along with the illuminated silhouette of the Lakestone estate. 6 months, I thought to myself. In 6 months, everything would change. The drive back to New York gave me time to reflect on the reunion and the carefully cultivated image my family maintained. The Williams dynasty, as my mother liked to call it, had built its reputation on traditional financial successes: banking, investments, corporate leadership. Innovation, in their worldview, meant finding new ways to maximize existing systems, not reimagining the systems themselves. When I arrived at my apartment in Brooklyn the next morning, the contrast between my reality and their perception couldn't have been starker. While my mother imagined me struggling in some cramped studio, I actually owned the entire converted industrial loft with its floor-to-ceiling windows and exposed brick walls. The space was minimalist by choice rather than necessity, reflecting my preference for functionality and clean design over the ornate, status-conscious decor of my childhood home. My assistant, Maya, had already arrived and was working at the kitchen island, surrounded by tablets displaying various project updates. "How was the family reunion?" she asked without looking up from her screen. "As judgmental as predicted?" My mother managed to call me the family disappointment in a toast, so I'd say it lived up to expectations, I replied, pouring myself coffee from the carafe Maya had prepared. She winced. "That's impressive, even for her. Did you tell them about Nexus? The merger? Any of it?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Jennifer," Maya sighed, finally looking up. "You realize that in a few months, your face will be on the cover of tech magazines. Your parents are going to find out eventually." "I know. But I'd rather they find out when the success is so undeniable that even they can't diminish it." Maya had been with me since the early days of Nexus, when we worked out of my living room and paid ourselves minimum wage to keep the company afloat. She understood better than most the scope of what we'd built and the challenges we'd overcome. "You bought their dream house," she reminded me. "That seems pretty undeniable." I smiled at the thought. They don't know that part yet either. But they will, soon enough. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Executive team meeting in 30 minutes at the main office in Chelsea. I changed quickly into a simple but impeccably tailored charcoal suit that had cost more than my mother would believe I could afford. Another small irony. While the Williams family measured status in obvious displays of wealth, I had developed a taste for quality that didn't announce itself so loudly. The headquarters of Nexus Technologies occupied a renovated warehouse in Chelsea, where exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures contrasted with cutting-edge technology and sleek modern furnishings. As I walked through the open workspace, conversations quieted momentarily, not from intimidation but respectful acknowledgement. I had deliberately fostered a culture where hierarchy existed for clarity rather than power, where ideas were valued regardless of title. Rebecca Chen, my CFO, fell into step beside me as I headed toward the conference room. The legal team delivered the final merger documents this morning. Everything's ready for signatures next week. And the property acquisition? Completed. Yesterday, she confirmed. The Lakestone estate is officially yours. The renovation contractors are scheduled to begin work next month, after the merger announcement. The executive meeting covered the usual pre-merger details: integration planning, press strategy, market positioning. As we reviewed the announcements that would soon reshape the digital personalization industry, I found myself thinking about how my parents would receive the news. Would they finally see value in the path I had chosen? Would my mother's dismissal of my internet projects transform into retroactive support? "The press is already speculating," reported Jason Kim, our communications director, drawing me back to the present. Wall Street Journal had a piece this morning about disruption in the personalization space. They don't have the details yet, but they're circling. "What about the personal angle?" asked Rebecca. "Once they connect you to the Williams financial family, that adds another dimension to the story." I had deliberately kept my family connections separate from Nexus's narrative, not to hide my background, but to ensure the company's success would be evaluated on its own merits. "We focus on the technology and the market impact," I replied. "My family connections are irrelevant to what we've built." The meeting continued with updates from product development and client services. Our AI personalization platform was now being implemented across major retail, entertainment, and financial service sectors, with a client list that included several companies my parents considered the gold standard of business success. After the meeting, I stayed behind with Rebecca to review the property plans for the Lakestone estate. The renovation would transform the mansion into a cutting-edge innovation lab while preserving its architectural integrity and natural setting. "The location is perfect for the collaborative environment we want to create," I explained, reviewing the architectural renderings. "Isolated enough for focus, but close enough to New York for client meetings." Rebecca studied me carefully. "And the fact that it's the property your parents have coveted for decades? Just a happy coincidence?" I met her gaze evenly. "The business case for the acquisition stands on its own. The personal connection is additional context." She smiled knowingly. "Well, it's going to be quite the statement when they find out, intentional or not." That evening, as I worked late in my office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, my phone lit up with a text from my cousin Daniel. "Your name came up at post-reunion brunch. Mom mentioned she heard you were doing well with some tech thing." Aunt Catherine dismissed it as playing with computers. "Thought you'd appreciate the irony." I smiled at his message. The Williams family's dismissal of technology as somehow less substantial than traditional finance was a persistent blind spot, one that had allowed me to build Nexus without their scrutiny or interference. Their underestimation had been, in many ways, my greatest advantage: freedom to innovate without the weight of family expectations or premature judgment. I replied simply, "The irony is appreciated. They'll understand soon enough." 2 weeks after the reunion, I was in San Francisco for meetings with potential integration partners when my phone rang with my father's number, an unusual occurrence that immediately caught my attention. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Jennifer," he said, his voice tinged with an excitement I rarely heard from him. "The Lakestone estate, you remember? The property I showed you on Lake Champlain? It's back on the market, and your mother and I have decided to make an offer." I felt a flutter of unexpected anxiety. The real estate transaction had been completed, but apparently not all listing sites had been updated. "That's unexpected," I said carefully. "I thought it was out of your price range." "It is, technically," he acknowledged, "but your mother has become fixated on it since the reunion. She's calling it our legacy property, something to pass down through the family." The irony was almost too perfect. While they had been dismissing my career choices, I had been building a company valuable enough to casually acquire the property they considered the ultimate symbol of success. "We have a viewing scheduled for next weekend," he continued. "I know you're busy with your projects, but your mother thought you might want to see it. Maybe you could join us. It could be a nice family outing." The opportunity had presented itself sooner than I'd planned, but perhaps that was for the best. Actually, Dad, I would like to join you for that viewing, I said, making a quick decision. I happen to be very interested in the Lakestone estate. He seemed pleased but surprised. Really? That's wonderful, Jen. Your mother will be delighted. As we arranged the details, I realized the timeline had accelerated. The confrontation I had imagined happening after the merger announcement would now occur beforehand, in a more intimate setting. Perhaps that was better, allowing my parents to process the revelation privately before it became public knowledge. The days leading up to the property viewing were filled with merger preparations and long-distance coordination with my team in New York. I arranged to fly from San Francisco directly to Vermont, arriving the night before the scheduled viewing. I booked a room at a boutique hotel overlooking the lake, deliberately avoiding staying with my parents at their summer house nearby. I needed the mental space, the separation between their world and mine, before bringing those worlds into direct collision. That evening, I stood on the hotel balcony watching the sunset over Lake Champlain, thinking about what the next day would bring. How do you tell the people who have dismissed your choices for years that those very choices have led to a success they couldn't have imagined? How do you reveal that you've achieved enough to casually purchase the symbol of achievement they've coveted for decades? My phone chimed with an email from Rebecca. The final merger valuation had come in even higher than projected. Nexus Technologies would officially be valued at $327 million after the acquisition, with my remaining ownership stake worth approximately $112 million. Numbers that would render my mother speechless, if only temporarily. But it wasn't about the numbers, not really. It was about building something meaningful, something that changed how people interacted with digital content, something that made the online world more responsive to human needs rather than corporate agendas. The financial success was validation, but it had never been the primary goal. The morning of the viewing dawned clear and crisp, with that perfect early autumn light that made Lake Champlain look like it was scattered with diamonds. I arrived at the Lakestone estate 30 minutes early, meeting with the real estate agent who had agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to proceed with the viewing as if the property were still available. "Ms. Williams, to be clear," she said, frowning. "Slightly. You want me to show your parents the property as if it's still for sale, even though you purchased it 2 weeks ago?" "Just for the initial walkthrough," I explained. "I'll explain the situation to them myself partway through the tour. There are family dynamics that make this reveal a bit sensitive." She seemed uncertain but eventually agreed. I waited in the great room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, rehearsing what I would say when the moment came. At precisely 11 o'clock, I heard the front door open, followed by the real estate agent's professional voice, explaining the property's features to my parents as they entered the foyer. The estate offers over 8,000 square feet of living space, with 5 bedrooms and spectacular lake views from most rooms. The previous owners completed a full renovation just 3 years ago, updating all systems while preserving the architectural integrity. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered," my mother's voice carried down the hall, filled with the rare sound of genuine enthusiasm. "The great room is just through here," the agent continued, leading them toward where I waited. I stood as they entered, watching as confusion replaced their initial awe at the room's grandeur. "Jennifer?" My mother stopped abruptly. "What are you doing here?" The real estate agent gave me a subtle nod before excusing herself. "I'll give you folks a few minutes. There are some features of the property I need to double-check before we continue the tour." When she had gone, my father approached me with a puzzled expression. "Jen, this is a surprise. How did you know about our viewing?" "You told me, remember? When you called about making an offer." "Yes, but—" He glanced around, still confused by my presence. "Are you interested in seeing the property too?" My mother's confusion was quickly shifting to irritation. "Jennifer, if you've come all this way to try to talk us out of this purchase, I should tell you we've made up our minds. This has been our dream for 30 years. I'm not here to talk you out of anything, I said, taking a deep breath. I'm here because there's something you need to know about this property. What could you possibly know that we don't? My mother asked. We've been following this listing for years. It's no longer for sale, I said simply. My mother's expression hardened. What do you mean? We have an appointment with the agent. The listing was active as of yesterday. It was sold 2 weeks ago, I continued. The agent agreed to show you the property as a courtesy, but it's already changed hands. That's impossible, my father interjected, genuine disappointment evident in his voice. We would have heard. Our agent would have told us. It was a private sale, I explained, completed quickly and without the typical market announcement. My mother narrowed her eyes, studying me with growing suspicion. How do you know these details? And why are you here if the property is sold? The moment had arrived. For years, I had imagined this revelation happening differently. Perhaps after a major press announcement about Nexus, with my success already validated by the business world they respected. Instead, it was happening here, in the quiet witness of lake views and morning light. I know because I'm the one who bought it, I said, watching as their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief. That's not funny, Jennifer, my mother said sharply. It's not a joke, Mom. I purchased the Lakestone estate 2 weeks ago. My father stared at me, processing my words with careful consideration. Jen, this property was listed at $14 million. 14.2, actually, I corrected gently. The final sale was 13.8. This is absurd, my mother declared, her voice rising slightly. You live in a rental apartment in Brooklyn. You work in whatever online marketing thing you do. There is absolutely no way you could afford this property. Rather than argue, I reached into my bag and retrieved the property deed, handing it to my father. He examined it carefully, his decades in finance making him familiar with such documents. I watched as the reality slowly registered in his expression. It's legitimate, he said quietly, looking up at me with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Jennifer's name is on the deed. My mother took the document from him, scanning it as if searching for evidence of some elaborate deception. Finding none, she looked up at me, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. How? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I founded a company called Nexus Technologies 4 years ago, I began, finally sharing the journey I had kept hidden while they dismissed my potential. We developed a proprietary AI system that personalizes digital experiences across platforms. We currently have 23 patents, 74 employees, and next week we're announcing a merger that values the company at just over $300 million. The silence that followed was profound, a vacuum where years of misconceptions were suddenly extracted, leaving an empty space that truth rushed to fill. 300 million, my father repeated, seemingly unable to grasp the scale. But you never said anything, my mother said, accusation mixing with confusion. All these years, when we thought you were struggling, when we worried about your future. Would you have understood what I was building if I had tried to explain it? I asked gently. 4 years ago, when I was working 18-hour days coding in my apartment, would you have seen value in what I was creating? Or would you have just pushed harder for me to take that position at your friend's investment firm? The question hung between us, its answer evident in her expression. She wouldn't have understood. She would have dismissed it as another of Jennifer's impractical ventures, another reason she wasn't living up to the Williams family potential. Why this house? My father asked, gesturing to the space around us. Of all the properties you could have purchased, it's going to be Nexus's innovation lab, I explained. The location is perfect for the collaborative, creative environment we're developing for our next phase. The fact that it's a property you've always admired is significant, but secondary to its actual purpose. My mother lowered herself onto one of the sleek sofas, still clutching the property deed. "At the reunion, when I called you the family disappointment," she began, unable to finish the thought. "You were measuring my worth by standards that didn't apply to what I was building," I completed for her. "I wasn't offended, Mom. I just knew you couldn't see the full picture yet. And now we're standing in the full picture," my father said with a touch of wonder, looking around at the property I now owned. My mother's expression shifted through a complex series of emotions: shock, embarrassment, recalibration, and finally, a tentative pride she seemed almost afraid to embrace. "Next week, when the merger is announced, Nexus will become a major player in the tech industry," I continued. "My role as founder and CEO will be public knowledge. I wanted you to know before it hit the financial news." "CEO?" my father repeated, a new respect evident in his voice. "Our daughter, the CEO of a $300 million company." "I'd like to show you both around," I said, gesturing toward the rest of the house. "Not as potential buyers, but as my family. This space will be transformed in the coming months, but the core of what attracted you to it will remain." My mother remained rooted to the sofa, still processing the revelation, but my father nodded slowly and stood. I led them through the sprawling estate, explaining my vision for each space. The eastern wing that would become collaborative workspaces, the former ballroom that would transform into a technology testing environment, the terrace that would serve as a natural thinking area for our creative teams. "The property includes 12 acres, I explained as we walked along the lakefront path. "We're preserving most of it as natural space. There's something about the intersection of technology and nature that sparks innovation." My father listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about Nexus's technology and business model. My mother remained uncharacteristically silent, following a few steps behind, still clutching the property deed as if it might dissolve if she loosened her grip. "The renovation starts next month," I continued. "We're working with an architectural firm that specializes in sustainable conversions of historic properties. The goal is to maintain the estate's character while creating a cutting-edge innovation space." "This is remarkable, Jen," my father said, genuine admiration in his voice. "I had no idea you were building something of this scale." "That was rather the point, wasn't it?" My mother finally spoke, her tone difficult to read. "Keeping us in the dark while you... What? Proved us wrong?" I turned to face her directly. We stood on the expansive back terrace overlooking the lake, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. "It wasn't about proving anyone wrong, Mom. It was about building something without the weight of expectations or premature judgment. From the beginning, you saw my interest in technology as a diversion, not a career path. Would you have understood or supported what I was creating 4 years ago when it was just an idea and lines of code?" She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. "This achievement didn't happen despite your doubts," I continued gently. "In some ways, it happened because of them. The freedom of being underestimated allowed me to work without pressure, to take risks that might have seemed foolish by traditional measures." "So we should be thanked for dismissing your work?" she asked sharply. My father placed a calming hand on her arm. "Catherine, that's not what Jennifer is saying." "No, it's not," I agreed. "I'm saying that success takes different forms than the ones you recognize. The path you wanted for me? Corporate finance, strategic marriage, social positioning. Wasn't wrong, it just wasn't mine. What I've built aligns with my values and vision, not someone else's definition of achievement." My mother's expression softened slightly, the first fracture in the perfect facade she had maintained through decades of calculated advancement. $300 million, she said quietly. "And I've been trying to set you up with Thomas Berkeley because I thought you needed financial security." Despite the tension, I couldn't help but laugh. "Thomas Berkeley? who spent an entire dinner telling me about his Hamptons renovation budget. I think we can safely retire that particular project. A ghost of a smile crossed my mother's face, perhaps the first genuine one I'd seen directed at me in years. His conversation is rather limited, she admitted, but his family connections are impeccable. I have my own connections now, I pointed out, just in different circles. We continued the tour, ending in the estate's professional kitchen that would soon become a communal dining area for the innovation lab. The real estate agent had tactfully made herself scarce, leaving us to process this family revelation privately. "You should have told us," my mother said, breaking a long silence. "All these years, we've been worried about you, thinking you were struggling." "Would you have believed me if I had told you what I was building?" I asked. "Or would you have measured it against your own metrics and found it wanting? When I started Nexus, it wasn't valuable by conventional standards. Its worth wasn't in quarterly reports or market position. It was in potential, in vision. That's not something that translates easily to the Williams family value system." My father nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "We would have tried to direct you, to shape your vision into something we recognized as success." "Which would have killed it," I confirmed. Nexus succeeded precisely because it wasn't trying to be another version of traditional business. It was creating something new. My mother ran her hand along the marble countertop, a gesture I recognized from countless kitchen renovations she had overseen throughout my childhood. Assessing, evaluating, calculating value. "You own this outright?" she asked, the financial manager in her unable to resist the practical question. "The company does technically, but yes, it's fully paid for. No mortgage, no leveraged financing." She shook her head slightly, recalibrating her entire understanding of her daughter's position in the world. "And you don't live in that Brooklyn rental?" "I own my apartment," I corrected. "The entire building, actually. I bought it 2 years ago when Nexus's second round of funding came through. It was a good investment. That neighborhood has appreciated considerably." Another piece of the puzzle shifted into place for her. The financial security she had desperately wanted for me had been achieved years ago, while she was still arranging introductions to eligible bachelors with trust funds. "I need to sit down," she said, suddenly looking her age in a way I had never noticed before. We settled in the sunroom, where wicker furniture still awaited replacement with the ergonomic workstations planned for the space. My father poured water from a carafe left by the agent, handing a glass to my mother with the attentive care that had characterized their 40-year marriage. "Tell us about Nexus," he said, turning to me. "Not the financial valuation or the merger. Tell us what it actually does." It was the first time either of my parents had asked about my work with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. I explained the core technology, an AI system that learned user preferences across digital platforms to create truly personalized experiences without the privacy invasions that characterized most tech giants' approaches. The problem with current personalization is that it's either ineffective or intrusive, I explained. Companies either know too little about users to create meaningful experiences, or they know too much, harvesting data in ways that make people uncomfortable. Nexus created a third path, powerful personalization that keeps user data secure and private. My father listened with the focused attention he typically reserved for financial analysts and board presentations. My mother's expression gradually shifted from bewilderment to cautious interest as I outlined the market applications and growth trajectory. "The merger announcement next week is with Integrated Systems," I continued. "They have the scale and distribution networks we need, while financial analysts appreciate the revenue potential. The Wall Street Journal is planning a feature on the merger, and Bloomberg has requested an exclusive interview after the announcement. The combination of operational, financial, and media interest confirmed what we already knew. The merger represented a significant milestone not just for Nexus, but for the entire personalization technology sector. "What about the personal angle?" I asked, touching on the aspect Rebecca had been carefully avoiding. "How are they framing the Williams family connection?" She hesitated briefly before responding. "Several financial publications have already made the connection. Daughter of financial titan disrupts industry with AI innovation seems to be the emerging narrative. They're particularly interested in the contrast between traditional finance and cutting-edge technology within the same family." I had anticipated this framing, though the speed with which journalists had identified the family connection surprised me. "Let's neither promote nor discourage that angle," I decided. "The technology and business case should remain our primary focus, but I won't pretend the Williams name isn't part of my history." "Balanced approach," Rebecca agreed. "Though I should mention your cousin Emma's husband has already reached out to our PR team, suggesting a family perspective piece for his firm's industry newsletter." I laughed, despite myself. "The Williams network mobilizes quickly, politely. Decline for now. We can revisit family narratives after the merger integration is complete." The reminder of my extended family's rapid recalibration was both amusing and slightly disconcerting. For years, I had been the disappointing cousin who had rejected traditional paths for uncertain technological ventures. Now, with financial validation, those same family members would undoubtedly position themselves as having always recognized my potential. We worked through the afternoon finalizing announcement details, pausing only briefly when my phone chimed with a text from my mother. "Your father and I have been thinking about Monday's announcement. We'll be watching from home, of course, but would you prefer we make ourselves available for comment if journalists reach out to us? We want to support however you think best." The consideration behind the message touched me. Recognition of my autonomy coupled with genuine desire to help. A year ago, my mother would have simply inserted herself into the narrative, claiming retroactive support for choices she had previously criticized. This measured offer represented significant growth. "Thank you for asking," I replied. "If contacted, brief positive statements expressing pride would be appreciated, but emphasizing that Nexus succeeded on its own merits rather than family connections." Her response came quickly. "Understood completely. Your accomplishment stands on its own. We are simply fortunate to be connected to it through you." The sentiment brought an unexpected lump to my throat. After years of trying to force me into predetermined paths, my mother was finally seeing and acknowledging my actual journey. It wasn't complete understanding, perhaps, but it was genuine respect, a foundation on which we might build a more authentic relationship. Sunday evening found me back at my hotel, reviewing my notes for the following day's announcement, while news alerts periodically chimed with speculative articles about the rumored merger. The financial press had begun, connecting dots between Nexus Technologies, integrated systems, and the significant market implications of their combined capabilities. A knock at my door surprised me. Hotel staff didn't typically make evening visits, and Rebecca had returned to New York to oversee final preparations there. I opened the door to find Daniel and Lauren, my cousin and his wife, standing in the hallway with a bottle of champagne and what appeared to be a handcrafted wooden box. "Surprise!" Daniel grinned. "We decided to come a day early. Thought you might appreciate some family support that doesn't come with complicated emotional baggage the night before your big announcement." The thoughtfulness of their gesture moved me deeply. "You didn't have to drive up tonight. Tomorrow would have been fine." "Actually, we did," Lauren corrected with her characteristic directness. "If the financial blogs are even half right about this merger, tomorrow you'll be surrounded by executives and journalists. Tonight, you're just our cousin Jen who could probably use some non-Williams family company." Their insight into what I might need in this moment, connection without complication, support without agenda, confirmed why they had always been my favorite relatives. "Come in," I welcomed them warmly. "Though I should warn you, I've been living on room service and merger documents for the past 2 days." Daniel held up the champagne. Hence the provisions. And Lauren brought something special she's been working on. We settled in the hotel suite's sitting area, where Daniel opened the champagne while Lauren presented the wooden box she'd been carrying. "It's not finished," she cautioned as I examined the beautifully crafted container. "But I wanted you to see it before the public announcement." Inside the box was a small sculpture in Lauren's distinctive style. Flowing forms of metal and wood that somehow captured both organic movement and technological precision. At its center, I recognized the algorithmic pattern that had been Nexus's original logo, subtly integrated into a design that suggested growth, connection, and possibility. "It's extraordinary," I said, genuinely moved by the artistry and thoughtfulness. "You've captured exactly what Nexus represents, technology that enhances human connection rather than replacing it." Lauren smiled, pleased by my understanding of her intent. "I've been following your work more closely than you probably realized. What you're building matters beyond the financial valuation everyone will be talking about tomorrow. I wanted to create something that honored that deeper purpose. The acknowledgement of Nexus's meaning beyond its market position touched me more deeply than the most enthusiastic financial validation." Lauren, with her artist's perception, had seen and honored the core vision that had sustained me through years of development and doubt. "This means more than you know," I told her sincerely, "especially coming from someone who understands what it means to pursue a vision others don't immediately recognize or value." Lauren had faced her own struggles with family acceptance when she chose sculpture over the law career her parents had envisioned. Her journey paralleled mine in many ways, though in the arts rather than technology. "We unconventional cousins need to stick together," Daniel commented, raising his champagne glass. To Jennifer and Nexus, redefining success on your own terms while ironically exceeding the Williams family's traditional metrics in the process. We laughed together at the perfect encapsulation of my journey, rejection of prescribed paths, leading to unexpected fulfillment of conventional standards. It wasn't what I had sought, but there was undeniable satisfaction in the symmetry. "How are Aunt Catherine and Uncle Robert handling the revelation?" Daniel asked, curious about the family dynamics. "Mom's been getting incomplete reports through the Williams grapevine, but the details seem to change with each retelling." "Better than I expected," I admitted. "There was the initial shock, of course, but they've adapted with surprising grace. Dad seems genuinely proud, and Mom is recalibrating her narrative." "Aunt Catherine's specialty," Daniel observed wryly. "I imagine by next week she'll have always believed in your technological potential and supported your unconventional path." "Actually, she's been more authentic than that," I corrected, wanting to acknowledge my mother's growth. "She's acknowledged that she didn't understand what I was building and wouldn't have seen its value in the early stages. That's significant evolution for someone who's built her identity on being consistently right." Lauren smiled at this insight. "People can surprise you, especially when confronted with undeniable evidence that their perspective has been limited. I experienced something similar with my father when my work was featured in that national exhibition last year. Suddenly, the hobby he had dismissed became a legitimate career in his eyes." The parallel resonated deeply. The transformation of parental perception when external validation forced reconsideration of previously dismissed choices. "It shouldn't take financial success or public recognition to validate our paths," I observed. "But there's something powerfully clarifying about achievement that can't be diminished or dismissed." "The ultimate, I told you so without having to say it," Daniel agreed. Though in fairness, the Williams family values have always centered on measurable accomplishment. They may have had too narrow a definition of what constituted meaningful achievement, but once you translated your work into metrics, they understand. Market valuation, merger terms, property acquisition. You essentially offered them a bridge between worldviews. His insight captured exactly what had happened with my parents. The Lakestone estate purchase had provided tangible evidence of success in terms they recognized and valued, creating space for genuine reconsideration of my choices. We talked late into the evening, covering everything from merger details to family dynamics to Lauren's upcoming exhibition in Chicago. Their presence offered exactly what I needed before tomorrow's public announcement: connection without complication, interest without agenda, support that expected nothing in return. As they prepared to leave, Daniel embraced me warmly. "We'll be watching the announcement tomorrow, cheering from afar. And we'll see you next weekend for the official Lakestone tour, assuming you're not too busy with your new public mogul status." "Never too busy for you two," I assured him. "Besides, I could use some normal family interaction after what promises to be an intense week of media scrutiny." After they departed, I stood by the hotel window overlooking Lake Champlain, visible now only as a darker expanse against the night sky. Somewhere along its shore stood the Lakestone estate, future home of Nexus's Innovation Center and unexpected bridge between my professional achievement and family reconciliation. Tomorrow would bring the public revelation of what I had built, the merger that would transform Nexus from promising startup to industry leader, the inevitable connection of my personal history to my professional achievement. But tonight had reminded me of something essential, that beyond valuation metrics and market position, beyond family approval or public recognition, success meant building something authentic and meaningful, something that reflected your values, rather than someone else's expectations. The journey from family disappointment to successful founder hadn't happened overnight. It had been built through thousands of small choices, consistent effort, and commitment to a vision others couldn't. Yet see, the validation coming with tomorrow's announcement was gratifying, certainly, but it wasn't the core achievement. The true success lay in remaining faithful to that vision even when those closest to me couldn't understand or appreciate it. Monday. Morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of pristine autumn day that seemed designed for significant beginnings. I dressed carefully for the announcement, a tailored suit that projected authority without ostentation, accessorized with subtle acknowledgement of my journey. My grandmother's vintage watch, tradition reimagined for the present, and a small pin designed by Lauren years ago, creativity valued alongside convention. At precisely 9 a.m., the press release went live across major financial networks and technology publications. Nexus Technologies and Integrated Systems announce historic merger. Within minutes, my phone began lighting up with notifications. Market. Analysts releasing initial assessments, technology blogs speculating on implementation timelines, financial publications highlighting the $327 million valuation. Rebecca coordinated our response from Nexus headquarters in New York, where I would join her later that afternoon for a press conference following the morning's required SEC filings and investor calls. For now, I monitored the unfolding narrative. From my hotel room, watching as the financial world processed what we had built while being underestimated. By 9:30, the family angle had emerged in the coverage. Williams Scion disrupts finance industry with AI innovation. The Wall Street Journal highlighted the irony of traditional banking family producing a technology founder whose platform would transform financial services. Bloomberg ran a special feature comparing 3 generations of Williams' business leadership across manufacturing, investment banking, and technology innovation. At 10:15, my mother called, earlier than I had expected given the ongoing media developments. "Jennifer," she began without preamble, "the coverage is extraordinary. Your father has been fielding calls all morning from colleagues who never realized the connection. The journal piece was particularly insightful about the generational evolution of business leadership." Her voice carried genuine pride, but also something more nuanced, a note of respect that went beyond parental satisfaction to professional acknowledgement. "The technology is the real story," I reminded her gently. "The family connection makes for interesting context, but Nexus's value lies in what it does, not who founded it." "Of course," she agreed immediately. Though I must admit there's satisfaction in seeing the Williams name associated with forward thinking. Innovation rather than just traditional finance. It positions the family legacy quite strategically for the digital era. I smiled at her characteristic framing. Even genuine pride filtered through strategic positioning and social calculation. Some aspects of Catherine Williams would never change, and perhaps they shouldn't. Her ability to navigate social dynamics and craft compelling narratives represented its own form of intelligence and skill. The Berkeley family called this morning, she continued, unable to resist sharing this particular development. Apparently, Thomas is quite eager to reconnect, given your shared interests in the technology sector. Your father told them you were unavailable due to merger commitments, which seemed the most diplomatic response. The amusement in her voice suggested she fully recognized the irony. The strategic match she had once pushed was now pursuing connection that she herself was deflecting on my behalf. "Thank you for running interference," I replied, appreciating her support in navigating the social recalibrations that would inevitably follow today's announcement. "Well, circumstances change," she observed with unusual directness. "What remains constant is family looking out for one another's best interests, even if our understanding of those interests evolves over time." The statement represented her most explicit acknowledgement yet of how her perspective had shifted. Recognition that her previous assessment of my needs and choices had been limited by her own understanding. "I appreciate that, Mom," I said sincerely. "And I appreciate your support today." "We're watching the press conference this afternoon," she informed me. "Your father has canceled his appointments to be home for it. We thought about coming to New York, but decided that might create unnecessary complication on an already significant day." The consideration behind this decision touched me deeply. Recognition of my autonomy coupled with genuine desire to support. A year ago, my mother would have appeared at the press conference without consultation, positioning herself prominently in the family success narrative. This restraint represented remarkable growth. After ending the call, I checked the latest market response to the announcement. Nexus stock had jumped 22% in the first hour of trading, while Integrated Systems was up 15%. Financial analysts were releasing increasingly positive assessments as they digested the full implications of the merged technologies. Technology publications were running features on the personalization revolution our combined platforms would enable. By noon, I was en route to New York for the afternoon press conference, coordinating final details with Rebecca via video call while monitoring ongoing market response. The narrative was evolving exactly as we had hoped. Initial focus on the financial metrics giving way to deeper analysis of the technology's transformative potential. "The Williams angle is gaining traction," Rebecca reported as we finalized the press conference format. "We've had requests from 3 major publications for features on the family business evolution across generations. How do you want to handle those?" I considered the question carefully. For years, I had maintained separation between my family, background and professional identity, wanting Nexus to be evaluated on its own merits rather than through the lens of Williams family connections. But with the merger announcement, that separation had collapsed. My full identity, including my family history, was now part of the public narrative. Let's engage selectively, I decided. One thoughtful feature that explores innovation across generations could be valuable, especially if it focuses on evolving business models rather than personality-driven journalism. Rebecca nodded, understanding my desire to acknowledge heritage without being defined by it. I'll work with communications to identify the most substantive request. Meanwhile, the Lakestone estate renovation has generated interest from architectural and technology publications. They're intrigued by the symbolism of historic property being transformed into innovation headquarters. The property that had once represented unattainable aspiration to my parents was now positioned as the perfect embodiment of Nexus's philosophy, honoring valuable elements of tradition while reimagining them for contemporary purpose. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Those requests make sense for the Innovation Center launch, I agreed. Let's revisit them once the renovation plans are finalized. We landed in New York with just enough time for me to review the latest merger. Coverage before heading to Nexus headquarters for the press conference. The office was buzzing with energy. Team members who had worked for years in relative obscurity, now finding their efforts validated by widespread recognition and enthusiastic market response. "There she is," called Jason, our lead developer, as I walked through the main workspace. The woman who told us 4 years ago that personalization could be both powerful and private, when everyone else said we had to choose one or the other. A spontaneous round of applause spread through the office, not for the financial valuation or merger terms, but for the validation of the vision we had built together through years of development and refinement. "This isn't my success," I reminded them, genuinely moved by their support. "It's what we've built together. Engineers, designers, strategists, everyone who believed in the potential when it was just lines of code and theoretical models." The acknowledgement of our collective achievement set the perfect tone for the press conference that followed. Standing before cameras and journalists in Nexus's main conference room, I emphasized not just the financial metrics, but the human impact of our technology. How personalized digital experiences could enhance connection rather than isolation, empower users rather than exploiting them, create value through respect rather than extraction. The merger with integrated systems represents not just market expansion but philosophical alignment, I explained in response to a question about integration challenges. Both companies believe technology should serve human needs rather than subordinate them. Our combined platform will transform personalization precisely because it places user agency at the center of the experience. The questions ranged from technical specifications to implementation timelines to market projections. I navigated them with the confidence that comes from genuine expertise, noting with satisfaction that the journalists seemed increasingly interested in the technology itself, rather than just the financial implications or family narrative. As the formal press conference concluded and individual interviews began, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led to this moment. The path from family disappointment to successful founder hadn't been about proving critics wrong or seeking external validation. It had been about building something authentic and meaningful, something aligned with my values rather than someone else's definition of achievement. Rebecca appeared at my elbow between interviews, tablet in hand with the latest market updates. "The response has been overwhelmingly positive," she reported. "Financial analysts are projecting even higher growth potential than we modeled, and technology publications are positioning Nexus as the leader in ethical personalization." "And the Williams family angle?" I asked, curious about how that narrative was evolving. "Interestingly nuanced," she replied. The initial pieces focused on the obvious contrast between traditional finance and technology innovation, but the more thoughtful coverage is exploring how different generations interpret similar values, excellence, vision, adaptation, through the lens of their particular era. The framing resonated deeply with my own evolving understanding of my relationship to family legacy. Perhaps I hadn't rejected Williams' tradition so much as reinterpreted it for a contemporary context, preserving the core values of innovation, integrity, and excellence, while adapting their expression to new possibilities. As the interviews concluded and the media departed, the Nexus team gathered for an impromptu celebration. Nothing elaborate, just champagne and paper cups, and genuine appreciation for the milestone we had achieved together. These were the people who had believed in the vision when it existed only as algorithms and potential, who had worked alongside me through pivots and challenges, who had created something meaningful through collective effort rather than individual brilliance. "To Nexus," I proposed, raising my makeshift champagne flute. Not to its valuation or market position, but to what it represents. Technology that enhances human experience rather than diminishing it. innovation that serves genuine needs rather than creating artificial ones, success measured by impact rather than extraction. The team responded with enthusiastic agreement, their expressions reflecting not just professional satisfaction, but personal investment in the values our company embodied. In that moment, surrounded by colleagues who had become collaborators and friends, I felt a sense of fulfillment that transcended external validation or financial metrics. My phone vibrated with an incoming text. My father, typically succinct, watched the press conference. Excellent presentation of complex technical concepts in accessible terms. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. The message touched me deeply, not just for its expression of pride, but for its specific focus on my communication effectiveness rather than financial achievement. He had seen and valued the substance of my work, not just its market validation. A few minutes later, another text arrived, my mother this time. You presented with remarkable poise and clarity. The Williams public speaking genes expressing themselves beautifully in a new context. Several friends have called to express admiration for both the business achievement and your graceful handling of the media attention. Her characteristic emphasis on social perception and family connection made me smile. Some things remained constant even as others evolved. The fact that she now saw my public speaking ability as an expression of family traits rather than a departure from them suggested she was finding ways to integrate my choices into her understanding of William's identity. As the celebration continued around me, I stepped away briefly to respond to my parents' messages with genuine appreciation for their support. The space between us hadn't disappeared. Decades of misunderstanding and different values couldn't be erased by a single successful announcement. But bridges were being built, connections forming where barriers had once stood. Later that evening, after most of the team had departed and the office had quieted, Rebecca found me in my office reviewing the day's coverage and market response. You should go home and get some rest, she advised. Tomorrow brings integration planning and a whole new phase of questions and decisions. I will, I promised. Just taking a moment to process everything that's happened today. She nodded, understanding. Quite a journey from the family disappointment to technology leader featured in the Wall Street Journal. Though I suspect the most meaningful part isn't the public validation, but the internal knowledge that you stayed true to your vision even when those closest to you couldn't see its value. Her insight captured exactly what I had been reflecting on. The most significant achievement wasn't the merger announcement or market response, gratifying though those were. It was the commitment to authentic purpose through years of doubt and dismissal, the creation of something meaningful regardless of whether others initially understood or valued it. You know what's ironic? I observed. When I started Nexus, I was trying to create something separate from the Williams family legacy, my own path, my own definition of success. But looking at it now, I realize I was actually expressing the core Williams values: innovation, excellence, adaptation, just in a different context than they expected. Evolution rather than rejection, Rebecca summarized, continuing the legacy by reimagining it for a new era. The framework created space for integration rather than separation, honoring valuable elements of tradition while transforming them for contemporary purpose. It paralleled exactly what we were doing with the Lakestone estate, preserving architectural integrity while adapting the space for innovation. Speaking of evolution, Rebecca continued, your cousin Daniel called while you were in the final interview. He and Lauren are still planning to visit the estate this weekend, and he mentioned something about your mother already drafting plans for a Thanksgiving gathering at the Innovation Center. I laughed, unsurprised by my mother's characteristic efficiency in planning family events months in advance. Some aspects of Catherine Williams will never change. Though her ability to recalibrate her narrative is genuinely impressive, from dismissing my work as internet projects to planning holiday celebrations at the technology headquarters in the span of 3 days. Family dynamics are remarkably Adaptable when success enters the equation, Rebecca observed wryly. Though to be fair, your parents seem to be making genuine efforts to understand and appreciate what you've built, not just claim retroactive support. They are, I acknowledged, wanting to give them credit for their evolution. It's not complete, understanding, but it's authentic engagement, asking questions about the technology itself rather than just the financial metrics, recognizing that success takes different forms than they initially recognized. As I prepared to leave the office, gathering the day's papers and market reports, I paused to look out at the Manhattan skyline, the tangible embodiment of traditional financial power now being transformed by technological innovation. Somewhere, in that landscape of buildings was the Preston Group headquarters where my father had built his career in investment banking. Elsewhere stood the integrated systems offices that would soon merge operations with Nexus. And on Lake Champlain, the Lakestone estate awaited transformation into our innovation center. The connections between these seemingly separate worlds were becoming increasingly clear, not through rejection of tradition, but through its thoughtful evolution, not through severing family ties, but through reimagining them for contemporary purpose. The journey from family disappointment to successful founder hadn't been about proving critics wrong or vindicating past choices. It had been about building something authentic that spoke its own truth, regardless of who understood. Initially, the fact that my family now recognized that value was satisfying, certainly, but it had never been the goal. The true achievement had been there all along, in the courage to define success on my own terms, in the perseverance to build something meaningful despite doubt, in the freedom that came from valuing internal conviction over external validation. As I left the office and stepped into the Manhattan evening, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with market validation or public recognition. It came from alignment, between vision and reality, between personal values and professional achievement, between family legacy and individual innovation. The Williams family disappointment had built something valuable, not despite her background, but through its reinterpretation, not by rejecting tradition, but by evolving it for a new era. In that transformation lay the most meaningful success of all, not proving others wrong, but proving that different paths could lead to shared values, that legacy could be honored through innovation rather than replication, that authentic purpose could bridge worlds that once seemed irreconcilably separate. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. We have the technology they've been trying to develop for years. Together, we'll reshape how people experience digital content. And you developed this yourself? My mother asked, still struggling to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the successful entrepreneur sitting before her. I founded the company and created the initial algorithms, I clarified. But Nexus has brilliant engineers and strategists who've been essential to its evolution. Success is rarely a solo achievement. That sounds like something your grandfather would say, my father observed with a small smile. He always believed in building strong teams rather than glorifying individual brilliance. The comparison surprised me. My grandfather Williams had built the family's initial fortune through manufacturing in the post-war years, before my father transitioned the business toward financial services. I had few memories of him, but his portrait had hung prominently in our family home, a reminder of the legacy we were all expected to uphold. I never thought of that connection, I admitted. But maybe his influence was there all along, just expressed differently than expected. The realization created a bridge between worlds I had long considered separate, the Williams family tradition and my own divergent path. Perhaps I hadn't rejected the family legacy so much as reinterpreted it for a new era. The property will be ready for Nexus employees by early spring, I said, bringing the conversation back to the immediate future. You're both welcome to visit. Anytime, of course. This may be company headquarters, but it's also part of our family story now, just not in the way you imagined. My mother looked around the sunroom, seemingly seeing it with new eyes. "And you chose this property specifically? Of all the places you could have selected for your innovation lab?" The question carried layers of meaning. Was this a deliberate statement? A symbolic gesture aimed at them? The truth was both simpler and more complex. "I chose it because it's perfect for what Nexus needs," I replied honestly. "The location, the architecture, the setting, all of it aligns with the creative environment we want to create. The fact that it's a property you've always admired is meaningful to me, but it wasn't the primary motivation." My father nodded, accepting this explanation, but my mother's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. After decades of strategic social positioning, she found it difficult to believe that any significant choice could be made without calculated personal implications. "What happens now?" she asked, ever practical even in moments of emotional upheaval. "You process this information however you need to," I said gently. "Next week, the merger announcement goes public. My position as founder and CEO of Nexus will become widely known. The Williams name will be connected to technology innovation rather than just traditional finance. Your cousins will be absolutely stunned," she murmured, and I caught a glimpse of something unexpected in her expression, a flicker of satisfaction at the thought of her daughter outshining her sister's children, who had been held up as exemplars for years. "This isn't about family competition, Mom," I reminded her. "It's about creating something meaningful." "Of course," she agreed quickly, though the slight smile lingering at the corner of her mouth suggested she was already mentally rehearsing how she would casually mention her daughter's $300 million company at the next family gathering. As we prepared to leave, standing once more in the great room with its spectacular lake view, my father pulled me into an unexpected embrace. "I'm proud of you, Jen," he said quietly. "Not because of the financial success, though that's certainly impressive, but because you had the courage to define achievement on your own terms." The words touched me more deeply than I had anticipated. For all our differences, my father had always been the bridge between my mother's rigid expectations and my determination to forge my own path. "Thank you, Dad," I replied, genuinely moved. "That means a lot." My mother approached more cautiously, as if still calibrating the appropriate response to this seismic shift in family dynamics. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand lightly on my arm. "You've surprised us, Jennifer," she said, a masterpiece of understatement. I need some time to process all of this, but I am." She paused, searching for the right word, impressed by what you've accomplished. From Catherine Williams, this constituted high praise indeed, perhaps the most genuine acknowledgement of my capabilities she had ever offered. "I understand, Mom," I said, recognizing that decades of carefully constructed worldviews couldn't be dismantled in a single morning. "Take whatever time you need." As they drove away, I remained on the steps of the Lakestone estate, soon to be Nexus Technologies' innovation headquarters. Next week, the business world would learn about the merger, about the company I had built while being underestimated, about the vision that had been dismissed as internet projects and playing with computers. But this moment, watching my parents drive away with their perception of me fundamentally altered, felt like an important milestone in itself. Not because I needed their validation or approval, but because I had remained true to my vision even when those closest to me couldn't see its value. The ride back to my hotel was quiet, a welcome opportunity to process the morning's emotional roller coaster. The real estate agent had been tactfully silent throughout the revelation, excusing herself with professional discretion once it became clear this was a family matter rather than a property transaction. I made a mental note to send her a generous thank you gift for navigating such an unusual situation. As I drove along the winding lakeside road, my phone buzzed with incoming messages, work matters that had continued in my absence, merger details that needed attention, team members seeking guidance on integration planning. The contrast between my family's newly discovered perception of me and the reality I had been living for years was still jarring. To them, I had transformed from disappointment to success story in a single morning. To the Nexus team, I had been a visionary leader, all along. Back at the hotel, I found Rebecca waiting in the lobby, having flown in from New York for our scheduled meeting with the legal team about the merger announcement. "So?" she asked, rising from her seat with a knowing expression. "How did the great revelation go?" "About as you'd expect," I replied, leading the way to the hotel's conference room where our legal team was already setting up. Shock, disbelief, recalibration. My mother is still processing, but my father seems genuinely proud. "And how are you feeling?" Rebecca pressed, always attuned to the personal dynamics beneath business transactions. I considered the question as we walked. Surprisingly at peace. It wasn't about proving them wrong or seeking validation. It was just time for the worlds to align. Rebecca nodded, understanding. She had been with me since the early days of Nexus, when we worked out of my apartment and survived on takeout and determination. She knew better than most the journey that had led to this moment. The legal meeting focused on the details of Monday's announcement: regulatory filings, press statements, market notifications. Our legal team had prepared meticulous documentation ensuring compliance with SEC requirements while positioning the merger for maximum positive impact. Throughout the discussion of technical details, I found my thoughts occasionally drifting back to the look on my mother's face when she realized the true extent of what I had built. "Jennifer?" Rebecca's voice pulled me back to the present. "Your thoughts on the timing for the employee announcement?" "Sorry," I refocused. "I think we should tell the team before the public announcement. They've earned the right to hear it directly rather than reading it in the press." The meeting continued for another hour, finalizing the sequence of events for Monday's revelation to the wider world. When we finally adjourned, Rebecca lingered behind as the legal team packed up their materials. "You're distracted," she observed once we were alone. "Second thoughts about the revelation to your parents?" "Not second thoughts," I clarified. "Just processing. For years, I've maintained this separation between my family identity and professional reality. There was a certain freedom in that compartmentalization. And now the compartments have collapsed into each other." Rebecca completed the thought. "It changes the dynamic." "Exactly. I'm not the daughter they underestimated anymore. I'm not operating in the shadows of their expectations. That's positive in many ways, but it also represents a shift in how I relate to them." Rebecca considered this. "It's the end of a certain kind of freedom, the freedom that comes from being underestimated. But maybe it creates space for a different kind of relationship." Her insight captured exactly what I had been trying to articulate. The freedom of low expectations had allowed me to build Nexus without the pressure of family judgment or premature evaluation. That particular liberty was gone now, replaced by a new dynamic I hadn't yet fully mapped. "You should get some rest," Rebecca advised, gathering her notes. "Monday's going to be intense, and you've had enough emotional revelations for one day." I promised to try, though I suspected sleep would be elusive. Too many thoughts were spinning through my mind. Memories of family gatherings where my choices had been subtly or not so subtly dismissed. Moments of doubt when their lack of faith had temporarily infected my own confidence. The long journey from that first algorithm coded in my Brooklyn apartment to the company now valued at hundreds of millions. That evening, alone in my hotel room overlooking the lake, I was surprised to receive a text from my cousin Daniel. "Just got a very confusing call from my mother, who got an even more confusing call from Aunt Catherine. Something about you buying Lakestone Estate and owning a tech company? What exactly did you do today?" I smiled at his message, imagining the wildfire of communication spreading through the extended Williams family. My mother wouldn't have been able to contain this information for long. It represented too significant a recalibration of family status and hierarchy. Had a real estate viewing with Mom and Dad that turned into a more comprehensive revelation about my professional life, I replied. Long story short, I own Nexus Technologies. We're announcing a major merger on Monday, and yes, I bought Lakestone Estate to convert into our innovation headquarters. 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, reappeared, disappeared again, Daniel clearly struggling to formulate a response. Finally, holy shit, Jen. Mom said something about Jennifer's internet company, but I had no idea. Wait, Nexus? The personalization platform? That Nexus? The one and only, I confirmed. Another pause. Then, my favorite cousin is a tech mogul who just casually bought the most expensive property on Lake Champlain, while the family was busy feeling sorry for her questionable life choices. This might be the best thing that's ever happened in William's family history. His response made me laugh out loud. Daniel had always been my ally in family gatherings, the one person who seemed to recognize that the Williams' definition of success might be unnecessarily narrow. Technically, the company bought it for business purposes, I clarified. But yes, that's essentially what happened. Aunt Catherine must be having an existential crisis, he replied. Her disappointment daughter turning out to be the most financially successful family member in a generation? That's got to be causing some serious cognitive dissonance. She's processing, I acknowledged. Dad seems genuinely proud, though. Uncle Robert always did have more depth than the rest of them, Daniel observed. Look, I know we haven't talked much lately. My fault. Life got busy. But I always knew you were building something meaningful, even if I didn't understand exactly what. I'm proud of you, cuz. His simple expression of faith meant more than he could know. Thanks, Daniel. That means a lot. So, when do I get a tour of your empire? He asked. Lauren and I are visiting her parents next weekend, but we could drive up to see the estate before we head back. The invitation reminded me that not all family connections had been characterized by judgment or misunderstanding. Daniel and Lauren had always accepted my choices without the weight of expectation that defined so many Williams family interactions. I'd love that, I replied sincerely. The renovation won't start for a few weeks, so you can see it in its original state, before we transform it into tech headquarters. We made arrangements for their visit, and after ending our conversation, I found myself reflecting on the different types of relationships within the same family. Some constraining, others supportive. Some defined by judgment, others by acceptance. Perhaps that was the most valuable lesson of the day, recognition that even within seemingly homogeneous family systems, there existed variation and possibility. The next morning, my phone rang with my father's number, an unusual occurrence that immediately caught my attention. Dad, everything okay? Jennifer, he began, his tone measured. Your mother and I have been talking about yesterday's revelation. We'd like to have dinner with you tonight if you're still in Vermont. There are some things we'd like to discuss before the announcement on Monday. The request wasn't entirely unexpected. My parents would need more time to process this shift in family dynamics to recalibrate their understanding of their daughter and her place in the world. Of course, I agreed. I'm staying through tomorrow to finalize some details about the property. Where would you like to meet? We thought perhaps the Lakestone Estate, he suggested. Since it's yours now, or Nexus's, I should say, it seemed appropriate. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The property that had represented unattainable aspiration to them for decades was now requesting permission to enter. The house is empty at the moment, I explained, but I could have some catering arranged if you'd prefer to meet there. That won't be necessary, he assured me. We'll bring dinner. Your mother has already contacted her favorite restaurant for a special order. Unless you have other preferences? The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me. They were trying in their way to acknowledge and adapt to this new reality. "That sounds perfect," I said. "Shall we say 7 o'clock?" As I ended the call, I realized I was experiencing something unusual in my interactions with my parents. Anticipation rather than anxiety. For years, family gatherings had been exercises in navigating criticism and misunderstanding. Now, for the first time, we would be meeting as adults with mutual respect, if not yet complete understanding. I spent the day in meetings with architects and contractors, discussing the renovation plans for transforming the Lakestone estate into Nexus's Innovation Center. The property's natural light and open spaces were perfect for the collaborative environment we wanted to create, while its historic character would provide a unique identity that differentiated our headquarters from typical tech campuses. "The eastern wing will become our main development space," I explained to the lead architect, walking through the empty rooms that would soon buzz with creative energy. "We want to maintain the architectural integrity while adapting it for modern technology needs." "It's an exceptional property," he observed, making notes as we toured. "The previous owners maintained it beautifully. Most renovations of this scale involve correcting years of neglect, but here we're simply reimagining well-preserved spaces." I nodded, appreciating his understanding of our vision. "Exactly. We're not fixing problems. We're evolving excellence for a new purpose." The phrase struck me as I said it, carrying resonance beyond the architectural discussion. Wasn't that essentially what I had done with the Williams family legacy? Not rejected tradition, but evolved it for a new era, preserving the values of excellence, innovation, and integrity while adapting them to contemporary contexts. By late afternoon, the preliminary renovation plans were taking shape. The architect promised detailed drawings within 2 weeks, with construction potentially beginning by month's end. I thanked him for his efficiency, aware that the Nexus board was eager to see the Innovation Center operational as quickly as possible after the merger announcement. As I prepared for dinner with my parents, I found myself giving unusual attention to my appearance, not from vanity, but from awareness that this evening represented a significant transition in our relationship. I chose a simple but elegant outfit that symbolized the bridge I was trying to build, classic enough to respect their traditional values, modern enough to reflect my own identity. They arrived precisely at 7, both dressed with the careful attention to detail that had characterized Williams' family occasions for generations. My mother carried a large bag from Meadowlark, the upscale restaurant that had catered Williams' gatherings since my childhood, while my father balanced a bottle of wine and what appeared to be a small wrapped package. "Jennifer," my mother greeted me with an air kiss that hovered somewhere between her usual formality and a more genuine warmth. "The property is even more impressive in the evening light." "It's the western exposure," my father explained, his comfort with practical details. "Emerging as always, the angle of the sunset highlights the architectural features. One of the reasons this location has always been considered premium." I welcomed them into what would soon become the Innovation Center's main reception area. Without furniture, the space echoed slightly, our footsteps reverberating off hardwood floors and high ceilings. "I've arranged a small table in the conservatory," I explained, leading them through the house. It seemed the most comfortable space without proper furnishings. The glass-enclosed room overlooking the lake had always been my favorite part of the estate during the tours I'd taken while considering the purchase. Flooded with natural light during the day and offering spectacular sunset views in the evening, it embodied the harmonious relationship between architecture and nature that would define the Nexus innovation philosophy. I had borrowed a small table and chairs from the caretaker's cottage, covering them with a simple cloth and arranging place settings I'd purchased that afternoon. The effect was modest but dignified, appropriate for this transitional moment in our family dynamic. "This is lovely," my mother setting down the food containers with practiced efficiency. Though I imagine your future entertaining here will be considerably more elaborate once the renovation is complete. Different, certainly, I agreed, helping my father open the wine. Nexus events tend to focus more on collaborative experiences than formal dining. Our company culture values connection and creativity over hierarchy and tradition. A flicker of incomprehension crossed my mother's face. These priorities so different from the Williams family values she had spent decades cultivating. But she recovered quickly. Well, every industry has its own protocols. I'm sure you've mastered whatever is appropriate in the technology sector. It was a concession of sorts, an acknowledgement that the standards by which she had judged me might not apply universally. From Catherine Williams, this represented significant evolution. My father, less bound by social formalities, was already examining the conservatory's architectural details. Remarkable craftsmanship in these glass junctions, he observed. You don't see this kind of attention to detail in modern construction. Will you preserve these elements in the renovation? Absolutely, I confirmed, appreciating his focus on substantive matters rather than social dynamics. The architectural integrity is a key part of what makes this space special. We're enhancing, not replacing. We settled at the small table, as my mother unpacked the dinner she had arranged. All my childhood favorites, I noticed with surprise. Grilled salmon with dill sauce, roasted vegetables with the particular herb blend I had always preferred, artisan bread from the bakery she considered the only acceptable source in Vermont. You remembered my favorite meal, I observed, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. A hint of color rose in my mother's cheeks. I am your mother, Jennifer. Contrary to what you might think, I have paid attention to your preferences over the years. The statement contained multitudes: acknowledgement of our disconnection, assertion of maternal awareness, suggestion that perhaps I had underestimated her just as she had underestimated me. I never doubted that, Mom, I said gently. We just had different ideas about what mattered. My father cleared his throat, always the mediator when conversations threatened to veer into emotional territory. The wine should complement the salmon perfectly. It's from that small vineyard in Oregon we discovered last year. We settled into dinner, the conversation initially focusing on safe topics: the property's history, the remarkable autumn weather, mutual acquaintances from Vermont's social circles. Gradually, as the wine was poured and the familiar food created a backdrop of comfort, we moved toward the unspoken questions that hung between us. Your mother and I have been discussing yesterday's revelation, my father began carefully, trying to understand not just what you've accomplished, which is clearly extraordinary, but why you felt it necessary to keep it from us for so long. It wasn't an accusation, but a genuine question, offered with the balanced consideration that characterized his approach to complex issues. My mother watched me intently, her expression suggesting she too sought understanding rather than confrontation. It wasn't about deception, I explained, choosing my words carefully. It was about creating space to build something authentic, without the weight of expectations or premature judgment. Our expectations were only ever for your success and security, my mother interjected, a hint of her characteristic defensiveness emerging. Your definition of success, I clarified gently. When I started Nexus, it didn't fit the Williams model of achievement. It wasn't an established institution, a prestigious firm, a recognized path. It was an idea, an algorithm, a possibility. Would you have seen its value then? Or would you have measured it against familiar standards and found it wanting? The question hung between us, its answer evident in her expression. She wouldn't have understood or valued what I was creating in those early stages. I might not have appreciated its potential, my father acknowledged, filling the silence. Financial services tend to favor established patterns over emerging innovations. It's a limitation in my perspective that I'm just beginning to recognize. His humility surprised me. the successful investment banker admitting the boundaries of his understanding. It created an opening for genuine conversation rather than defensive positioning. That's why I needed separation, I explained. Not rejection, not rebellion, just space to develop something new without constant comparison to traditional metrics. My mother folded her napkin precisely, a gesture I recognized from countless dinner conversations when she was gathering her thoughts for a significant statement. "I've been thinking about your grandfather Williams," she said unexpectedly. "When he started the manufacturing business after the war, his own father thought he was making a terrible mistake. The family had been in shipping for generations. Venturing into manufacturing seemed like an unnecessary risk, an abandonment of established expertise." This was family history I had never heard, a narrative that didn't fit the seamless success story that had been presented throughout my childhood. "He faced considerable family opposition," she continued. "But he recognized that the post-war economy would reward domestic production over international shipping. He wasn't rejecting the family legacy so much as evolving it for a new era." The parallel to my own journey was unmistakable, and the fact that my mother was drawing this connection represented a remarkable shift in her understanding. "I never knew that," I admitted. "The family always presented his success as the natural continuation of William's excellence, because that's how family narratives work," my father explained. "We incorporate new chapters into the existing story, even when they represent significant departures from what came before. Success has a way of retroactively justifying innovation." The insight illuminated so much about the Williams family dynamics, the way achievement was claimed and celebrated while the messy, uncertain paths that led there were carefully edited from the official history. "Your grandfather would have understood what you're building," my mother said, surprising me further. "He had a visionary quality similar to what you've described about Nexus, seeing possibilities before they became obvious to others." The comparison was perhaps the most meaningful acknowledgement she could have offered, linking my unconventional path to the family founder whose portrait had overseen every significant Williams gathering for decades. "Thank you for sharing that," I said sincerely. "It helps me understand my own journey in a different context." My father reached for the small package he had brought, sliding it across the table toward me. "This seems like the right moment for this. We brought it thinking it might help bridge some of the distance that's developed between us." The package was wrapped in simple blue paper, secured with a ribbon that looked vaguely familiar. I opened it carefully to find a small leather-bound book, its cover worn with age and handling. "Your grandfather's first business journal," my father explained as I examined it with growing wonder. He recorded his initial ideas, market observations, and strategic decisions as he built what would become Williams Manufacturing. "Your mother and I thought you might find some resonance with your own entrepreneurial journey." I opened the journal with care, recognizing the significance of this family artifact being entrusted to me. The yellowed pages contained handwritten notes in a firm, precise script, observations about post-war economic conditions, calculations of production costs, sketches of factory floor layouts. "This is extraordinary," I said, deeply moved by the gesture. "I had no idea this existed." "It's been in the family archive," my mother explained. "Perhaps we should have shared it sooner, helped you see that innovation has always been part of the Williams legacy, even when it appeared to defy tradition." The acknowledgement contained layers of meaning. Recognition that they might have presented a more nuanced family narrative, one that created space for deviation and evolution, rather than just conformity to established patterns. "He would be proud of what you're building," my father added quietly. "Not because of the financial valuation, impressive though that is, but because you identified a need and created an innovative solution. That's the true Williams legacy. Not any particular industry or approach, but the vision to see opportunities others miss." The reframing of family history opened a door I hadn't realized was available. The possibility that my path wasn't a rejection of Williams' values but their expression in a new context. It didn't erase the years of misunderstanding or the pain of being measured against inappropriate standards, but it created a bridge between worlds I had long considered separate. I never thought of it that way, I admitted. I've always seen my work as disconnected from the family legacy, something built despite rather than because of my background. Perhaps it's both, my father suggested thoughtfully. Your determination to create something on your own terms certainly developed, in response to family pressure. But the underlying capacities, the analytical thinking, the strategic vision, the commitment to excellence, those have always been Williams' traits, even when applied to unfamiliar domains. My mother, ever practical, returned to the immediate future. What happens after Monday's announcement? When everyone knows about Nexus and your role as founder? The company transitions to a new phase, I explained. The merger with Integrated Systems gives us the scale and distribution channels to implement our technology across major platforms. My role becomes more public, more focused on strategic direction than day-to-day operations. And the Williams connection? She pressed. Will that be part of the public narrative? The question revealed her core concern, how this unexpected success would be integrated into the carefully curated family story she had managed for decades. That depends partly on you, I replied honestly. I've never hidden my background, but I've also never leveraged the Williams name for Nexus's benefit. The company succeeded on its own merits, not family connections. But surely there's value in acknowledging the lineage, she persisted. 3 generations of business innovation, from manufacturing to finance to technology, it's quite a compelling narrative. I smiled slightly, recognizing her instinct to position my achievement within the framework of family tradition rather than independent accomplishment. The business press may make those connections, especially after the announcement. But Nexus's identity will remain distinct from the Williams family history. My father, more attuned to my perspective, placed a calming hand on my mother's arm. Catherine, Jennifer has built something remarkable precisely because she created her own path. Let's not rush to claim it as a family achievement before we've even properly understood what she's created. His insight surprised me, the acknowledgement that respect required understanding, not just approval or association. My mother seemed about to protest, but instead nodded slightly, accepting the wisdom in his observation. You're right, of course, she conceded. Though I hope you'll forgive a mother's pride in wanting to celebrate her daughter's success, even if it took some time to recognize it properly. The statement was as close to an apology as Catherine Williams was likely to offer. Acknowledgement of misrecognition without explicit admission of error. For someone who had built her identity on being consistently right, this represented significant evolution. I understand, Mom, I said gently, and I appreciate that you're trying to bridge the gap now. We continued our dinner with a newfound openness, discussing the merger details, the renovation plans for the estate, and the future direction of Nexus Technologies. My parents asked thoughtful questions about the personalization platform, seeking genuine understanding rather than surface details they could reference in social conversations. As we finished our meal and moved to the terrace for coffee, watching the last light fade over Lake Champlain, my mother returned to the question that clearly still troubled her. I still don't entirely understand why you kept your success hidden for so long, she admitted. You must have known we would be proud, even if we might not have fully understood the technical aspects of what you were building. My father tensed slightly, concerned she was reopening wounds that had just begun to heal, but I appreciated her honesty. The question deserved a thoughtful response. It wasn't about denying you pride or satisfaction, I explained. It was about needing to define achievement on my own terms before subjecting it to external evaluation. For years, my choices were measured against the Williams family yardstick and found wanting. I needed to build something that was unquestionably successful by any standard, before reintroducing it to that particular judgment. The explanation seemed to reach her in a way my previous attempts hadn't. "I suppose we did make you feel that your path was somehow less valuable than the traditional routes your cousins followed," she acknowledged. "That wasn't our intention, but intention doesn't always align with impact." The distinction between intention and impact represented a surprising sophistication in her self-reflection, recognition that her parental concern had manifested as judgment, regardless of her conscious aims. "We were worried," my father added quietly. The technology sector seemed so volatile, so different from the stable institutions we understood. "Our concern for your security expressed itself as criticism of your choices. I understand that better now," I admitted. "From your perspective, you were trying to guide me toward paths with proven records of success and stability. But innovation requires venturing beyond established patterns, taking calculated risks to create something new." "Like your grandfather," my mother observed, the connection clearly meaningful to her. "He risked family disapproval to pursue what he believed was the right direction for a changing world." The parallel created a framework that allowed her to understand my choices through a lens she valued: family, legacy, and business acumen rather than rebellion or rejection. As the evening drew to a close, my parents preparing to leave, my father asked the question that would define our relationship moving forward. "How would you like us to be involved in this next phase of your journey, Jennifer? We want to support you, but we also recognize that you've built this success independently." The question touched me deeply, genuine recognition of my autonomy coupled with sincere desire for connection. It offered neither presumptuous insertion into my achievement nor distant approval, but the possibility of authentic engagement based on mutual respect. "I'd like you to understand what I've built," I replied honestly. "Not just the financial metrics or market position, but the vision behind Nexus, why personalization matters, how technology can enhance human experience rather than diminish it. If you're genuinely interested in that conversation, I'd welcome your involvement." "We are," my father assured me. "Perhaps not with the technical expertise you might wish for, but with sincere desire to understand what matters to you." My mother added her own perspective. "And if there are ways our experience or connections might be helpful as Nexus grows, we're available without presumption or interference. You've proven quite definitively that you don't need our guidance, but perhaps occasionally our perspective might offer some value." The offer was calibrated perfectly. Acknowledgement of my demonstrated capability coupled with measured suggestion of potential contribution. It represented significant growth from the directive parenting that had characterized our relationship for decades. "I'd appreciate that," I said sincerely. "There are certainly areas where your experience with institutional relationships and strategic positioning could be valuable, especially as we navigate the post-merger landscape." As they prepared to leave, my mother paused in the entrance hall, looking around the estate that would soon transform into Nexus's innovation headquarters. "You know, your father and I used to imagine hosting Williams family gatherings here someday," she admitted. "Holiday celebrations, summer parties by the lake. It was part of what made the property so appealing, its potential for creating family memories, as well as its investment value." The wistfulness in her voice surprised me, a rare glimpse of emotional vulnerability from someone who typically maintained careful social composure. "Those gatherings can still happen," I assured her. "The fact that it's a corporate headquarters doesn't preclude family events. Once the renovation is complete, we should plan a proper Williams family celebration, something that honors tradition, while embracing new directions." Her expression brightened at the suggestion. "I'd like that very much. Perhaps for Thanksgiving? It would give us something meaningful to be thankful for. Not just your success, though that's certainly worth celebrating, but the reconnection of family ties that might otherwise have continued to fray." The insightfulness of her observation caught me by surprise. For all her social calculation and status consciousness, my mother possessed emotional intelligence that emerged in unexpected moments. Thanksgiving would be perfect, I agreed. A celebration of abundance and gratitude seems appropriate for this new chapter. After they departed, I remained at the estate, walking through the empty rooms that would soon buzz with innovation and collaboration. The space felt different now, still primarily Nexus's future headquarters, but with a new layer of meaning as a potential bridge between my professional achievement and family connection. The next morning brought a flurry of final preparations for Monday's announcement. Rebecca arrived from New York with the communications team, reviewing press materials and investor presentations. Legal advisors confirmed regulatory clearances, while integration specialists finalized transition plans for merging operations with integrated systems. The Nexus board is unanimously supportive, Rebecca reported as we reviewed final documentation. The valuation exceeded their highest projections, and the strategic advantages of the integrated systems distribution channels are compelling. And the market analysts? I asked, focused on ensuring a smooth reception for the announcement. Initial briefings suggest strongly positive response, she confirmed. Tech sector analysts recognize the competitive advantage our personalization platform creates. The Lakestone estate serves as a powerful symbol throughout the story, representing both Jennifer's business success and the family reconciliation that follows. Initially, the property represents unattainable aspiration for her parents, a dream home they coveted for 30 years but could never quite afford, even at the height of her father's career. It symbolizes traditional success in the Williams family worldview. When Jennifer purchases the property to transform it into Nexus's innovation headquarters, it becomes a physical manifestation of her success on her own terms. This creates a perfect moment of revelation when her parents discover she owns what they've always desired. The estate's transformation mirrors Jennifer's personal journey. Just as she doesn't reject her family legacy, but evolves it for a new era, the renovation preserves the architectural integrity of the historic property while adapting it for innovative technology purposes. This symbolizes integration rather than rejection, honoring valuable elements of tradition while reimagining them for contemporary purpose. By the end of the story, the Lakestone estate becomes a literal bridge between worlds that once seemed separate. It's both a cutting-edge technology headquarters and a place where family gatherings can occur. When Jennifer's mother begins planning Thanksgiving at the Innovation Center, it represents the complete integration of family relationships and professional achievement. The estate embodies the central theme of the story, that meaningful success isn't about rejecting tradition or proving critics wrong, but about creating something authentic that eventually builds connections between seemingly disparate worlds.